Good afternoon to everyone in Washington and good evening to our audience watching in Turkey and across the Atlantic. It is a pleasure to begin 2025 with an important discussion on transatlantic relations and NATO. I am Defne Arslan, founding Senior Director of the Atlantic Council Turkey Programs and Atlantic Council in Turkey. We regret that we could not do this in person, despite a great interest from our Washington audience. Thank you all who have registered in person. Unfortunately, Washington weather did not permit us to proceed with our original plans. Nevertheless, we are all gathered today online, so welcome. I am delighted to be hosting the launch of the fourth issue of our defense journal with the theme NATO in an Evolving Geopolitical Landscape. The Defense Journal is an initiative we started in 2022 to provide independent analysis and insights regarding defense issues related to the United States, Turkey, and the regions around Turkey. Our latest issue explores the future of NATO in the context of changing transatlantic relations and the regional security issues, primarily about the recent developments in Syria. I believe cooperation among NATO allies are even more crucial today in the face of increasing great power competition and persistent conflicts in the region. With this opportunity, I would like to thank the Defense Journal co-managing editors, Rich Altson and John Casapoğlu, for their terrific work. I also would like to thank our honorary advisory board, General Wesley Clark, Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, General Jim Jones, Franklin Kramer, General Douglas Lute, and Dov Zakheim, who all provide vision and direction for the journal and continuously support our work. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce General James Jones for his keynote remarks. Following the keynote remarks, we are also hosting some of our advisory board members at the panel before we proceed to the Defense Journal issue launch. It is an honor hosting them all today. General Jones is the Executive Chairman Emeritus at the Atlantic Council, former U.S. National Security Advisor, and President of the Jones Group International. General Jones, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Defne, and for that kind introduction and for hosting this important event today. First and foremost, it's my pleasure to wish everyone a happy and healthy new year. It's great to kick off the year by joining you today for a very timely event and discussions. Back in 2023, it was a pleasure to help launch the journal's second issue. At that time, I shared my positive experiences working with Turkey and the Turkish people, starting as a young officer and then years later as Supreme Allied Commander for Europe at NATO, and finally as serving as National Security Advisor for President Obama. So my remarks then, which emphasized Turkey as an essential partner in tackling regional security challenges, rings true more today than ever before in light of the continuing crises and developments in Ukraine and the Middle East, including most notably now in Syria as well. The Transatlantic Partnership and NATO broadly is at its most critical point since the Cold War ended. As the Trump administration takes office, I think it would be in America's interest to bear in mind Turkey's rising geostrategic influence and the asset its conflicted, tested military and defense industrial base can provide for transatlantic security. NATO is facing a serious test by adversaries of the US-led international order as we witness enhanced cooperation between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. To successfully deliver on the pledge of peace through strength, the transatlantic alliance must take steps to prepare and ensure readiness in the face of persistent conflict and volatility. The latest issue of the Defense Journal explores NATO in its current state and how it should respond to the evolving geopolitical landscape. So I greatly look forward to the upcoming discussions. And I thank you again for including me in this initiative and this event. It's a great pleasure to be an honorary advisory board member of the Journal, and I look forward to seeing what comes next With that said, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to the moderator, Grady Wilson, to kick off the first panel on the future of NATO and transatlantic security. Thank you.
Thank you, General Jones, for those excellent remarks to kick us off and set the stage. I want to jump quickly into our first discussion on the future of NATO and transatlantic relations, featuring three very distinguished Atlantic Council board directors who, as Defne said, are also members of the Defense Journal's Honorary Advisory Board. We're delighted to have with us Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, who previously served as Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs. Dov Zakheim, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic International Studies and formerly an Undersecretary of Defense, and Frank Kramer, a former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sorry we couldn't be together in person, but Mother Nature or possibly General Winter had different plans. Before we begin, a couple housekeeping notes. This event is on the record, and we will reserve the final 10 to 15 minutes of each discussion for questions from the audience. You can submit questions by visiting the website askac.org. Choose this event and type away, and please state your full name and affiliation when sending your questions. Now let's get underway. I want to start by getting your reaction to one of the main themes of the latest issue. So the theme we can encapsulate as NATO's readiness and deterrence capabilities. And my question, I'm going to start with Paula. Do you think NATO is prepared to address the current and emerging challenges, including increasing great power competition, cooperation amongst our rivals, and persistent conflicts in Europe, the Middle East, and beyond? What steps should the alliance take to address these?
All right. Well, first, thank you, Grady, and delighted to be here with colleagues. And I do want to congratulate the Atlantic Council's Turkey program for the report. Congratulations to its primary authors, who we'll be hearing from later. And also just congratulations to you for the issuance of the Defense Journal and all the work that's been done in this domain. Grady, you asked me about the question and the core theme about NATO's preparedness. I would put it this way. I think that where NATO was, we're looking certainly pre-aggression, Russian aggression on Ukraine. And then also even before the Trump administration, Trump 1, I think there was a period of complacency, and I don't think it was focused on the kind of geopolitical environment at hand. I think it has now significantly moved in the right direction. And in terms of its preparedness, I'd first start with the fact that I think it's excellent, the fact that all the countries in one shape or another are looking at their defense expenditures and what they can be doing to bolster deterrence in light of particularly not just the Russian threat in Ukraine itself, but the concern that's been well articulated by many of the countries about the concern about continued Russian aggression. And we've seen that manifested particularly in terms of the level of defense spending. In December, I was in Warsaw and I was in Prague, just two countries. And of course, both were talking about how they were going to up their numbers. In the case of Poland, they're targeting 5%, even higher than 5%. So number one, I think it's moving in the right direction, certainly in terms of defense spending. Let me mention two more points, and then I will stop to just giving you a very quick, concise answer. But secondly is the fact that I like that NATO is looking at technology. Cyber is key. That's not been a domain that has been so front and center previously, but it definitely is now, and in a way that matters because we're talking about not just only some of the conventional kind of elements that one should be looking at in warfare, but also particularly use of technology, AI, cyber. The case in point of Ukraine, Ukraine gets attacked even up to some 1,000 cyber attacks a day. And then third and last, I would want to mention what I remember of out of area. That term was used, and I remember when, this is decades back, NATO did not want to look at out of area. I go back to Stoltenberg's before he stepped down. He focused on China. And he focused on China and the concerns about what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. What's happening there has great relevance to the Transatlantic Alliance. And in this case, he, as we know, also put forward, and which has been embraced, the need for a presence in the Indo-Pacific. So it's moved significantly in the right direction. Does more need to be done? I would say, yes, more does need to be done, particularly for those countries that I think need to step up to the plate and share more of the burden.
Thanks so much, Ambassador. I want to pick up on that kind of theme of the reaction perspective, positions of other NATO partners. The new Secretary General has called on allies to adopt a wartime mindset and reiterated that NATO partners and allies must spend more, get the spending to at least the current threshold. Maybe I can turn to you, Frank, and get your kind of thoughts on how that's being accepted throughout the alliance among partners. And also, this is, of course, a major bone of the Trump and the Trump administration for partners to pick up spending. So it's a broad spectrum of partners, of course. There's Western Europe, Eastern Europe. But what is your reaction or take on how this is being received across the full spectrum of the alliance?
Well, thanks very much, Grady. And first of all, I want to congratulate the ability to put out the, I believe it's the 4th edition of the Defense Journal. And I think that's really outstanding. Secondly, let me associate myself, as I almost always do, with Paula's remarks. I don't want to repeat them, but I think they are exactly on point. With respect to the new Secretary General's point about a wartime mindset, I think I'd start where Paula finished, which is to say a lot of good things being done, but some things yet to be done. And in that connection, I think NATO needs to look at a few things. One, spending. There's an emerging consensus, I would say. I don't think we're quite there, but an emerging consensus that the longstanding 2% goal of GDP is not sufficient. A lot of conversation about 3%, some people talking about even higher numbers. I think it's highly likely that the alliance will, at a minimum, go to a 3% floor. I'm not sure exactly what would turn out to be the numbers, but I think that's pretty likely. And I think that's the right thing to do. I think that, as Paula pointed out, there was a long period of complacency, and that led to significant deficiencies in the militaries. And I think these need to be overcome. Secondly, I would say that if you're going to spend, you really need to spend right. And there are two parts on that. There's a time frame and there's a specificity. So with respect to the what you might call the conventional capabilities that NATO has, spending's required. Those are important, but those don't come quickly. It takes a long time to get a new frigate. It takes a long time to get a new airplane. And so as we think about the potential threat, and I don't think anyone knows exactly what Mr. Putin or Russia might do, but there are concerns that sometime in the next, and then various people put different timeframes on it, 2 to 3 years, 2 to 5 years, we might actually see some action taken vis-a-vis the alliance itself, and in part depending, of course, what happens with respect to Ukraine. In a 2-year timeframe, it's very hard, even if there's an agreement, for example, at this summer's summit, to spend 3% for that to be turned into effective military capabilities. So I think what the alliance needs to do is to think hard about how to get additional capabilities in a shorter time frame. And I would underscore Paula's focus on technology. The United States in the Indo-Pacific has an initiative which has the name Replicator. They sometimes use the word hellscape. Basically, what they mean is to give the adversary in that area, which of course is China, a particular set of difficult military problems by the use of unmanned vehicles, unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned surface vehicles, unmanned underwater vehicles. It seems to me that NATO ought to take up that same approach, that NATO ought to have what I've written about once, a hellscape approach at replicator speed. That is to say, utilize unmanned vehicles in all three arenas: aerial, maritime surface, maritime underwater, and put those in place quickly. Now, the NATO nations are knowledgeable, but they don't have major programs along these lines. So this is the kind of thing that could be done. There's industrial capacity that could be used. They could partner with some US firms. They have some of their own companies that could do this, and it would be a very good use of spending money. This other area, I think, which is really critical, is that right now, for the most part, NATO forces are not at what might be called the forward line of contact if there were actually military action on the Eastern Front. So mobility becomes very, very important. And spending money on mobility, that includes both upgrading civilian capabilities, rail, ports, and the like, as well as military capabilities to be able to get forces forward in a timely fashion. NATO has a force model that says it'll have 100,000 forces forward in 10 days and 200,000 in 30 days. And I think it would be hard for NATO to do that. So utilizing the additional funding to upgrade military mobility, and in that connection, it'll be important also to work closely with the European Union. So I could pick out other things, but I think those two key areas, the prompt use of technology and the enhancement of military mobility, would make a tremendous difference with respect to NATO's so-called wartime mindset, as the Secretary General's talked about.
Thanks, Frank. Speaking of defense technologies, that brought into mind the Turkish defense industry's capabilities. I know we'll get into that in our next conversation. But for now, turning to Dov, first, want to give you any opportunity to respond to or give your take on what Paula and Frank shared, and also to just add a new question on that. Can you talk a little bit about what you expect from the Trump administration's general approach to transatlantic relations and NATO? Is this a really new, radically different approach from the Biden administration? And what does that mean in terms of opportunities and risks, if you see both, for alliance cohesion, cooperation, and regional stability more broadly?
Well, again, I want to echo what you've already heard. Thanks to the Atlantic Council for putting this together. Thanks to Defne for leading all of this from the start. Thanks to the editors of the journal. It is an impressive journal, and I'm proud to be associated with it. It's hard to build on what Paula and Frank have said, because they said so much, and I totally agree with it. So let me just make a few points and then move on to the second question. First, it is no small thing that 23 out of the 32 NATO countries have hit or will be hitting 2%. That's a pretty big deal considering how long we've been pushing for that. And we do have to thank Mr. Putin. There's no question about that. And yes, there's a push for 3%. I agree with Frank. 3% is going to happen. But there are people pushing for more, and it's not just Poland. And there are some who are already spending more than 3%. So you've got an upward pressure there that's terribly, terribly important. Turkey, for example, is spending a lot more than 3%, and has been for some time. So you've got that. The other area, the high technology area, NATO has a thing called Diana, and it's a very interesting concept because what it does, it's about innovation. It's an innovation accelerator. And I was out with my colleagues from the Commission on Emerging Technologies, which is a congressional commission, talking to NATO about this, about biotech. And NATO is working to spend money on that because there's not just a threat from biotech, but there's actually some promise in terms of how you can use medical biotech to save people in the golden hour, how you can use it to change the way people wear their uniforms, their capabilities, and so on. And it's not just biotech. Diana covers all technologies. And so the focus on emerging technologies, which Frank talked about, is there. And again, it needs a stimulant. And I think that's where the Secretary General was so right. We may not consider that we are at war, but Putin does. And he's acting that way. And even where we think that we have dominance, say in the Baltic region, because now we have Sweden and Finland, we don't if we don't exercise enough, if we don't move our troops forward enough. And oh, by the way, that's one way to move your money more quickly. I mean, Paula and Frank are absolutely right. You cannot get to 3% and spend it tomorrow. No question about that. But what you can do is up your operational capabilities now. And NATO is doing that, and it has more that it can do. Now, as far as the Trump administration, the first thing you got to remember is that Mr. Trump says a lot of things. He's not necessarily going to get Denmark to sell Greenland. Canada, I doubt, will become the 51st state. And you know, he's also threatened to invade Mexico. You know, but there's no Pancho Villa down there. So, you know, we hear a lot of things, and we've heard a lot of things about NATO. But then look at the personnel that he's actually hired. The last person he's probably going to speak to before he makes a decision on national security issues is his national security advisor. Mike Waltz is a strong supporter of NATO. So is his deputy, Alex Wong. Then you have the Secretary of State, who not only, Mr. Rubio, not only is a strong supporter of NATO, but was one of the co-sponsors of the legislation that requires now 2/3 of the Senate to vote to get out. So we're not getting out. So then the question becomes, what can we do, or what could Mr. Trump do to make life more difficult for NATO? And of course he could. No question about it. He could move troops out of Germany. But then again, he's also talking about moving troops into Poland. And quite frankly, if I were Mr. Putin, I'd rather not have them in Poland. I'd rather have them in Germany. So, you know, we have to wait and see about this. And then there's another thing, and here Turkey can be very, very important. Mr. Trump may have issues with some countries, doesn't seem to have them with Mr. Erdogan. And Mr. Erdogan cares very much about NATO because all he has to do is look across the Black Sea. And you have not heard Mr. Erdogan criticizing NATO per se. By the way, the same thing is true with Mr. Orban. The EU may have trouble with Mr. Orban in Turkey, excuse me, in Hungary. But Mr. Orban and the Hungarians still remember 1956, and they are not about to walk out of NATO, quite the contrary. So you've got an element within NATO that could clearly influence Mr. Trump's thinking. And I would add to that the Scandinavians. He has a soft spot for them. Sometimes he says he's Swedish. He's actually German, but he says he's Swedish. The point is, let's not wring our hands too quickly about all of this. Leaving aside the fact that Congress has made a clear statement, including a majority of the Republican Party in Congress, there is the fact that many countries for whom Mr. Trump does have a positive feeling are very strong supporters of NATO. So as I say, let's wait and see.
Thanks, Dov. And Paula, Frank, I do want to turn to you eventually to get your takes on what to expect from the Trump administration, given that that is kind of front and center on a lot of people's minds. The inauguration is just a couple weeks away now. So keep that in mind. But also to add another question, Paula, if I can go to you on Article 5, which is considered one of the backbones of NATO's strength and deterrence to prevent aggression. I think it's fair to say that with Russia and volatility in the Middle East, we see tests on both the eastern and southern flank. We talked about capabilities, but it's also a matter of political will. What can NATO allies, the US as kind of the de facto leader of NATO, do to reassure our partners and adversaries that this backbone remains in place and thereby deter aggression effectively?
Well, let me first just make a comment on the last question, if I may, in a very succinct way. I think Dov conveyed this. When you look at, the transition that will be taking place and the inauguration of new President Trump, I think that the message should be that one should look at opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities here. And that's what our audience should be looking at here, where it's not just having a domestic audience, but a foreign audience. I was as I said, in Poland and in Prague, and lots of questions came up. Should we do this? Should we do that? And quite honestly, it's very clear to me there are opportunities. And I want to underscore what he said when I think about the people who are advising President Trump and who are dealing with these issues in this administration, like the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, Alex Wong, his deputy, as well as Rubio at the State Department, and a number of others that have been appointed. They are proponents of alliances, of collective defense, of NATO. And so in this case, I think we should be looking at opportunities here. And I'm glad, Grady, you had that incorporated in your question. With regard to, your other question, by the way, I always ask my class, do you remember when Article 5 was invoked? And, it's interesting to me. Some know it, some don't know it. Well, Article 5 was invoked for the United States when we were attacked on September 11th. So my answer is, I believe that those who definitely follow these issues, care about these issues of collective defense, alliance structure, preparedness, deterrence, and Article 5 in that mix, the answer is yes. That is a core component here, should remain defense of one, defense for all. And I believe that undergirds everything that we're talking about, and including going on with US policy. I see that as a mainstay. I don't see that in question here. If that's part of your question to me, which I sort of was assuming. Am I correct, Brady?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Paula. Frank, can I get your reaction to both of those questions on Article 5 and the Trump administration, if you have a different take?
Well, sure. So I think that the recommendation that let's wait and see, as opposed to assume what's going to happen, is really the right way to look at things. And reflecting on who are the key players in the national security apparatus at the very top seems to me to be a potential tip-off. The president obviously gets to make the final decision, so yet to come. One of the things that I think is relevant to think about is that, of course, this administration is going to be quite concerned about the Indo-Pacific and about China. And the question will become, how does it choose to go at that set of issues? And broadly speaking, I think we've seen for the United States over the years that if we have allies with us, we do much better than if we try to do it on our own. That means it'll be very valuable to have the Europeans with us. There are a lot of reasons that they should want to be associated with U.S. policy, not least of which is what's encapsulated in the phrase de-risking, which we all talk about these days. That is to say, to be less reliant on China for things that are important to our military, to our economies, and the like. So as the new administration thinks about how to work closely with allies in terms of its Indo-Pacific approach, it will be relevant for it to think about how it can support its allies for the things that are most relevant to them at home. And broadly speaking, given one already has the inclination of the various National Security Advisor, Deputy National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, all designates, of course, at the moment, to be supportive in the context of Europe. It would seem to me, even for a president who puts China, if you will, front and center, that there's going to be great value in working closely with the Europeans, and that would include working closely in the NATO context. And that'll be especially so, I think, if we go back to the point that was made earlier, that it seems pretty likely, I think almost a certainty, that the Europeans will undertake to substantially increase their efforts in NATO, not only spending, but otherwise.
Thank you, Frank. Just want to remind our audience to submit your questions on askac.org, askac.org. We're nearing the end of our first discussion, but before we turn to questions, I just see a couple now. From the audience, I want to turn to Dov Zakheim and get your thoughts, comments on the Middle East and a lot of recent developments there. It's always a volatile region, of course. But we saw the end of the year obviously close with dramatic events in Syria. What do the security challenges in the Middle East mean for NATO alliance? This is also turning to obviously Turkey's neighborhood. We are the Turkey program after all. So I would love your thoughts and comments if you have any with cooperation with Turkey especially.
Well, obviously the fall of Assad has scrambled a lot of things, and we, of course, don't know how it all plays out. I mean, just today, the new Syrian leader refused to shake hands with the German foreign minister because she's a woman. So are these new people going to be Islamist? Are they going to be as moderate as they say they're going to be? We've already started to see the minority Alawis who ran the country under the Assads leaving Syria. On the other hand, there are refugees in Turkey that are moving back to Syria or would like to, Syrian refugees. Where does Iran and Turkey's interests clash? What is the Russian role? The Russians are hoping they can keep their bases there. That clearly is something NATO has to watch very, very closely in the Eastern Mediterranean. And then there's the relationship between Turkey and Israel that has blown hot and cold, pretty much for 70 years, give or take. Right now it's blowing cold, and it'll continue to blow cold as long as Hamas and Israel remain at war. Then it could turn on a dime as it has in the past. And then there's the Kurdish question. And does Syria, President Erdogan already said, it would be a total disaster if Syria breaks up and there's an independent Kurdish entity. He considers the PYD, the Democratic Union Party, the Kurds, who are the key players, by the way, in the Syrian Democratic Forces, which we, the United States, support. He considers them terrorists. And so you now have a dilemma here where we're supporting a group that Turkey bombs, actually. And if there are three countries bombing Syria right now, the Israelis on the one hand, we on the other to go after ISIS, and then Turkey going after what they consider to be Kurdish terrorists. How does all that play out? We just don't know. My guess is, for what it's worth, is that Syria will remain a united state. It will not create a kind of independent Rojava, which is what the Kurds call the area they control. That already will mitigate issues. It will not solve probably the most Turkish-Iranian tension we've seen in decades. How that plays out, we just don't know. It's not going to get solved immediately. And so particularly for Turkey, they're looking north at Russia, and now they have to look at Syria as well in a very different way than they did before, and it was a headache for them before. And NATO, of course, is bound. certainly to support Turkey in the Black Sea to the extent that it can. I mean, after all said and done, a Russian victory over Ukraine not only threatens Moldova, it threatens NATO ally Romania and possibly Bulgaria as well. And where does that leave Ankara? So you've got a lot of uncertainties here. The Syrian issue has compounded those uncertainties. And we just have to wait again. I mean, it sounds terrible to say wait and see about so many things, but you know what? If you straight line issues from today to the future, you're usually wrong.
Thanks, Dov. I'm looking at audience questions. I see one that you, Dov, basically covered, which was to make it more succinct how the U.S. can manage its relationship with Turkey and Israel on the one hand. As you said, it's very hot right now. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, if the U.S. can play a role, should play a role there. I'll leave.
Sure. Look, a couple of things. First, we do have influence over the Syrian Kurds by definition, because we support the Syrian Democratic Forces. So that at a minimum, we can exert pressure to ensure they don't go off on their own, which is Mr. Erdogan's nightmare, and not only his, quite honestly. I think it's a Turkish nightmare. So there's a role for us right there. Another thing we could do clearly is, and Mr. Trump has been very explicit about it in his usual explicit way, to force Hamas to negotiate and release those hostages. As soon as there's a Hamas deal, Turkey and Israel are now in a different place. That already changes things in the region right there. So there's that. A third area, given growing friction between Iran and Turkey, is what I'm sure Mr. Trump is going to do, which is to increase pressure on Iran. And then the last question, which is very much an open question, is what does he do about Ukraine? A deal on Ukraine, and look, Mr. Macron has essentially told Zelensky, you're going to have to give up territory. That's kind of interesting. And so if Mr. Trump can pull off a deal there, that eases pressure on Turkey as well. So there are lots of ways where we can work with the Turks, even if we don't entirely agree on how to deal with the Syrian Kurds, because after all, we've been working with them for years without agreeing on how to deal with the Syrian Kurds. It's a matter of minimizing the tensions. And I think, to steal a thought that Paula laid out just before, there are many opportunities to minimize those tensions.
Thanks, Dov. And yeah, let's get into, as you kind of started, the more detail specific about the kind of conflicts and uncertainties we're seeing. Paula, maybe I can turn to you if you have thoughts of your own on the Middle East, but also on Ukraine, the status of the war there, and your thoughts on how the Trump administration coming to power is changing the dynamics there.
Well, let me one footnote on the Middle East, because I think Dov really, who first in the first place is very steeped in those issues, meaning of the Middle East, and has many contacts there. I think he well articulated the situation, and I'll reverse it back, the opportunities that could emanate from the risks and the opportunities, or I'll use the word the challenges and the opportunities. I will just underscore, we've talked about Syria and, the ramifications in that case. I'd also just remind, I think Iran is going to be a very key issue for the incoming administration. And I think it'll be interesting to see what tack will be taken. I think there'll be extensive coordination with on this one with Israel, but also with Saudi Arabia, because there's a desire for the expansion of the Abraham Accords, and there are already those discussions with Saudi Arabia. So we will see what happens, but I see opportunities in that domain. You asked about Ukraine. Ukraine is also front and center. It's been stated as a priority of the Trump administration. I found it interesting. I'm paraphrasing. I believe President Trump, when he was quoted in one case in an interview, he said that actually he sees this situation as more complex and tougher to deal with and solve than the Middle East. And I think that right now there are already discussions taking place. We have seen that President Zelensky is listening to everyone and going everywhere. I'm not going to predict what will unfold here because there's been a lot put on the table. I do think I could say confidently this. I do think that the incoming administration would like to have peace, as been stated, and also, if I could use the word, a success that will be sustainable, that will really put not just Ukraine, but the surrounding area at peace and stability. It is going to be quite challenging, and I think a lot just really remains to be seen.
Thank you, Paula. We're about to wrap up. Frank, I want to give you just the opportunity for last words on the Middle East, Ukraine, and any kind of reaction to Dov and Paula's remarks.
Well, I'll just associate myself again with all the remarks. I'll make 2 points. First, with respect to Iran, one of the things that happened in defending against the several Iranian attacks against Israel was that a number of European countries were involved, particularly UK and France, and there was other support. And so I think what we can say, at least, is that Europe, or at least portions of Europe, see great value in working with Israel on these kinds of issues, and I think we can expect that to continue. The pressure on Hamas that is being articulated by the president-elect, I should say, and presumably will be brought to bear in however he chooses to do it, I think is terribly important because, as Dov has pointed out, once one makes that situation less fraught, it gives opportunities for other activities that really are potentially also very important. With respect to Iran, one of the issues I think that's of concern is that it's in a significantly weakened state, with the Israeli attack, for example, demonstrating how ineffective its military is. Does that cause Iran to want to accelerate its nuclear programs? It's an open question. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's something that the Trump administration, new Trump administration's policymakers will have to think hard about, and what their, I'm going to use the phrase they used the last time, maximum pressure approach will mean with respect to nuclear issues. With respect to Ukraine, I think the key issue will be, I think, a de facto set of agreements. I think it's going to be extremely hard to get Mr. Putin to agree to anything formal. We've seen what they put on the table in December 2021, which will not be acceptable to pretty much anyone. And so how to get to I'll call it a ceasefire in a de facto way will be a critical issue. Now, I have my own views about that. I'm not, of course, in the administration and won't be in the new administration, but I think that will require some significant degree of support to ensure that the Ukrainians, both militarily and economically, do not collapse. They are under significant pressure now, and I think that'll be important to keep up the support to them. But as to what the precise policy will be by the new administration, I have to defer to them. And, as I think all three of us have said already, let's wait and see. It's unfortunate that one has to do that, but predicting the future is a fool's goal.
Thanks so much, Frank. Thanks so much, Paula and Dov, for joining us for this first panel. We'll let you go there, but it was a great discussion and an honor to host you all.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you.